Welcome back. Today I am going to show you how to take this pine board and turn it into a mobile phone amplifier for your smartphone. So this design is intended for phones with speakers in the bottom right. It looks a little bit like the ones we sell on Etsy shown here, but we make kind of a double version. So the design is based off one in this book by Asa Christiana. This book's got a foreword by Nick Offerman if you guys are familiar with him. So there it is pictured right there. We're going for something looking like this. We're going to follow the plans in the book, but we're going to put our own spin on it throughout. Highly recommend this book. It's got a lot of really nice plans and nice images, and there's a focus on using as few tools as possible, making your own jigs so you don't have to buy tools, stuff like that. Really up my alley kind of stuff. So I'm just knocking this into two pieces. By the way, this piece is really .75 inches thick, 3/4 of an inch. It was marketed as a pine 1x8. So we're going to go ahead and clean up both sides. I've just knocked it in half to make it easier to work with so far. I've made sure that the length is about 3 times the length of a layer, because we're going to need 3 layers total to make this. Generally, you're going to make the inner layer a little thinner than the other 2 layers, but for this build, we're going to keep all 3 layers the same thickness just to kind of simplify things. So now we got a nice surface on both sides of this pine. We're going to go over to the table saw and we're going to cut this into our 3 sections that are going to end up being glued up together as 3 layers. So I'm using my Craig miter gauge here, and I have the stop set to a little over 9 inches. And getting clean edges on both sides. 3 perfectly equal pieces. I'm not really listing specific dimensions for this build, just giving you an idea because it really can vary. As long as the slot is cut for your phone specifically, you can kind of get away with a number of different dimensions. And we're going to do a final trim on the table saw to get everything looking nice anyway. So now it's time to throw the fence onto the table saw so that we can rip this piece down to size. It's sitting at around 8 inches right now. It only needs to be about 5 or so, so I'm cutting a couple inches off here, leaving plenty for later when I go to do my final trim, because when we go and glue these layers up, chances are we're going to want to clean those edges up one last time. Alright, we are looking pretty good here. We got some cool features in this wood. Now we got 3 perfect pieces here, same size, and they will be glued up. Now that we got our layers ready, it's time to trace our phone and start working on this middle layer that we're not actually going to see layer, but is the most important. So you see me tracing my phone here. Quick note about this project, my speaker is located in the bottom right of the phone. You can kind of see it there, and that is essential to this item actually working for your phone. So you might want to consider the reverse design if your speaker's on the other side, or a different design altogether if your speakers are on the sides. So I'm using something round that I found to kind of get an idea of where the hole is. It's not important how we draw that hole now, as long as we make this channel intersect it. So you can see I kind of screwed up drawing there. I didn't really need to trace anything because we're not going to see this layer, but we do want nice round surfaces along that channel so that sound is directed smoothly out the front of the device. So, taking my jigsaw here, one of the first tools I ever bought, but you can see I clearly failed to master it because it is drifting pretty good on me. Luckily, I've screwed up a little bit on the layer that we're not going to see, the functional layer, so as long as my phone fits, everything's going to be okay. So I'm using a technique here where I round into one corner and then come back the other way in order to achieve those right angles in the bottom left and bottom right. I could have made things easier on myself for this build by putting a narrower blade in my jigsaw before doing any of this, but I'm just using the blade that's in it already because it's a pretty general use blade, and frankly I can't find my stash of blades for the jigsaw. I just don't really use it that often. Usually favor the bandsaw. So you can see I'm just cutting this channel now, being careful not to put too much weight on the workpiece because there's not a lot of meat to it in this section, and I don't want it to snap as I have it clamped to the workbench. So we're just making sure we intersect this hole here as we cut this channel, trying to meet up on both sides. And again, this layer is going to be hidden, so this doesn't have to be pretty, just functional and a smooth curve. Lining up these 2 layers, we're getting ready for our first glue up. So this is going to be the middle layer glued up to the front piece. But before we glue them up, that front piece needs to be cut correctly. Basically, we just need to leave a little opening for the phone so we can interact with it. But we also need to create a little lip so that the phone can't fall out of the front. So basically, we're drawing the phone's shape, except taking about 1/8 of an inch off of each side. So I'm just going to draw that out, cut that out, and then we will glue the layers up. Alright, I'm feeling a little better about this cut because I just had some practice. And you'll see I get this one just a little better than the last one. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. Alright, doing a little better on this front piece now. The jigsaw is a great first tool to purchase if anybody's thinking about getting into woodworking. Definitely recommend picking up a jigsaw early. It's not the most accurate tool, but it lets you do a lot of different things. Using the same technique that I used on the interior piece, I'm going to go ahead and round into one corner here from one side that I cut already. And then I'm going to turn the jigsaw around and hit the other corner to get those right angles. The laser is kind of safe to follow on this thing, but there is blade drift that the laser's not going to tell you about. So just taking a minute to sand this up, at least get all the fuzzy stuff off the edges. I'm not going to go too nuts on this because it's not really a piece that you're going to see much of. Also taking a file to try to even out my inaccuracy with the jigsaw. Alright, so now it's time to do the glue up for the front 2 layers at least. We're going to have a separate glue up later on where we glue all 3 together, but we're going to need to cut that hole for the sound to come out, and we're going to do that in the first 2 layers, but not the 3rd layer that we glue up later. So here you can see I am gluing the interior middle piece and then putting the front right on top. Going to use most of the clamps in the shop for this. I think F-clamps that screw instead of trigger clamps like this would probably be better, and you'll see later on I did actually end up with a gap that I don't usually get in glue-ups like this, and I'm thinking my trigger clamp slipped on one corner. So you might see me using F-clamps in the future, but anyhow, make sure you get even pressure all the way around this bad boy and look for squeeze out. That's going to be a good indication that you got enough glue. So let's get all these clamps off. This dried for, I think, a couple hours all in all. I'm not really sure what I was thinking, but I suddenly wanted the front hole of this to be way bigger than pictured in the book. So I found a bigger object, this flower pot here. I think it's just about 4 inches actually. I decided to trace that on there instead onto the front plate, and that's going to be the size hole that I cut. So I went ahead and found half the distance across, which was about 1 15/16, just under 2 inches. So I went ahead and marked that on both sides, found the center of this circle. Doesn't have to be too perfect because we can trim this up on the table saw later. But now it's time to make a jig that's going to let us cut that circle with our jigsaw. So first we're going to drill a hole for the blade of the jigsaw. This is just a piece of 3/8 inch plywood that I had laying around. You can use a variety of materials as long as it's relatively flat. So we're going to use this double-sided tape. I'll leave a link to this stuff. It's super strong. It's great for making jigs like this. There's not a whole lot on a roll, but it is super high quality and can make some semi-permanent stuff. So once we get this mounted on here, what we're going to do is take our measurement from the center of the circle out, that 1 15/16, and we are going to measure that from the blade and drill a hole for a nail. And then that nail is going to be driven into the workpiece, actually the center of the circle that's going to be cut, and then the jigsaw is going to swing around that. You'll see it in action in just a bit here. So there we go, we've got the saw through mounted to this plate, blade in place, and we're going to go ahead and measure 1 15/16, or just 2 inches. It really doesn't matter as long as you've got enough wiggle room on your workpiece. So let's make a little mark, and you can see I've found a drill bit that is pretty similar to the size of this roofing nail. I thought a roofing nail would be good for this just because it's super easy to hit with a hammer, so it'd be easy to move the jig around. So there we go, we drilled a hole for that, got the nail through. This is not a perfect fit. Ideally you would get a perfect fit. This is a little loose for the nail that I have, which means there's going to be a little bit of play as I cut my circle, but I think everything's going to turn out okay. So let's get this workpiece clamped and ready to go so that we can get the saw all the way around this circle and not cut into the workbench. Before we do that though, we're going to have to take this Forstner bit and we're going to have to drill a pilot hole for the actual blade to get into the workpiece. We don't want to cut in from the edge if we can avoid it. You can go that route, kind of like a bandsaw box, but you're going to have to do a glue up afterward and try to hide a seam. So instead, we're going to go ahead and drill this pilot hole, drop the blade down in there, and start our cut like that. You're going to see a little later on, this actually led to a little bit of error. It's no big deal, you know, this is the first time I ever made this particular model. This is actually the first time I've done a jig like this as well. So it's all a learning experience, but here we go. Taking some time to position this properly, try to get it securely clamped while also leaving room for the jigsaw to travel all the way around. You'll see that I will end up moving these clamps at some point anyway, but that's just the nature of the game. So now I need to fix the jig after dropping the saw blade down the hole. I need to fix the jig into the workpiece. So I make a little indentation with the nail to help find it because I can't see because the plate there is in the way. But now I'm finding that little dent that I just put in the center with the nail. We're in, and now I'm just going to hammer it into place a few good pounds. Don't have to go all the way in. In fact, it's better if you don't. But make sure you're nice and solid so that the jig can pivot around this nail and be nice and snug. So we're looking pretty good. About ready to start here. Let's see what happens. So just go ahead and work your way around really slow. Try to keep that plate flat against the workpiece so that you don't get any funny angles with the blade. You're bound to get some kind of drift anyway, jigsawing through a piece this thick. So your cut might be a little beveled. This top section I'm cutting now actually suffered from that a bit, but once the jigsaw got moving through the workpiece, it kind of evened out, and my cut was much cleaner. I know there are people out there shaking their heads right now because I'm not using a thin blade to do this, and I'm kind of shaking my own head as I cut this, but it's making it around. It's pretty clean, doesn't really feel like I'm forcing it. But if you have a thinner blade on hand, I definitely recommend using it for this. You're going to make that turn more easily. So you can see what we ended up with here. Not bad, not super precise, and the cut is kind of beveled because of the nature of the jigsaw, but not too bad at all. Definitely a circle where we did not have one before. So I'm going to take some time to file this into shape. I'm going to work on where the pilot hole went in a little bit to try to minimize how much that little bump catches the eye. You'll see I don't get that out entirely, but that's alright. That's the first time ever doing this. So this is what we got so far with the two layers. See the channel cut leading into the hole. This glue up here will be glued to the third piece, the backing piece, and then the phone will drop in and Sam will be pushed out the front. So let's go ahead and get that done. Going to be using Titebond 3 for all of these glue ups today. I have it on hand. It is rumored to be stronger than Titebond 2, and it is waterproof, quote unquote. So get a generous amount on there just like before. If you're only going to apply glue to one side like I tend to do, you want to get that glue layer on nice and thick. So the second glue up is done, and it is time to get some clean edges on this thing, get it sanded, and get it finished. We're also going to put a nice router trim on it. It's really just a roundover, so it's going to give this a nice rounded look. Kind of do some sanding for us. So first I'm going to bring this over to the jointer and hit the bottom with it. So we're going to put a nice fresh flat edge on the bottom of the piece. We're going to bring that over to the table saw's fence, and then we're going to use that to bring the top of the piece down to size. So here I am with that jointed edge against the fence. shaving down the top of the piece and getting a nice clean flat edge there. Take a couple passes, just kind of eyeballing it, seeing what looks best. So this piece is actually wide enough that I feel safe running it this way as well. And I'm going to use the table saw again to clean both edges. So now we're over to my router table where I have a round over bit in. I've done one pass already. I've raised the bit and I'm giving this a deeper round over now. Kind of tricky hitting these inner parts here. You got to make sure you're going the right direction. Continuously think about it. Hitting the interior edge now. And because the way that this cut was beveled because of the jigsaw, I did not get the trim even all the way around that circle piece. If I wanted to, I could take more time with the file and try to pretend that I did, you know. But this is a working piece. I want to get it done. I want to see if it works. I don't know if I'm ever going to build another one of these in this same style again, because I don't know if it works yet. So the piece is actually functional right now, but go ahead and hang in there till the end and you'll see this thing in action. So for finish, I'm using this Watco Danish oil. It's got a walnut stain in it. I had it on hand and I can remember from previous projects that I really like the way that this looks on pine. It gives it this bronze gold color that stays light and still shows the grain of the wood. So it's super easy to apply. You just saturate a pad or a cloth like this, something lint-free, and wipe generously. Let it penetrate for 15 minutes, and then add another coat. Let that penetrate for 15 minutes, and then wipe off the excess. Easy as that. So you'll see me taking my time, just making sure I get good coverage, and then this is what it looked like with the finish on. I just love the color that you get with the Danish oil on pine. Nothing left to do now but test it out. Thanks for joining me on this one, guys. If you liked this video, please consider throwing it a like. That'll help me grow on YouTube. And if you're subscribed already, thank you so much. If you're not, consider it maybe. I don't know. I don't get too preachy about it. Anyway, have a good one.